If you've ever been to a black funeral and a white funeral, you already know they feel like two completely different events. One has a choir that'll have you on your feet. The other has a pamphlet and a 15-minute window. But those differences didn't come from nowhere. They go back centuries, rooted in West African spirituality, slavery, and survival. In 1955, one woman's decision about an open casket helped ignite the civil rights movement. And some of these traditions carry a meaning so deep your grandparents never even bothered to explain them. They just expected you to follow along. These are 25 old-school funeral traditions that separate black funerals from white funerals, and the history behind each one. Number 1. The homegoing celebration versus the somber funeral service. In traditional white American funerals, the tone is quiet, reserved. Grief is expressed through silence, soft hymns, and restraint inside a funeral chapel. But in black communities, especially those rooted in the Baptist and Pentecostal churches of the Deep South, a funeral is not a funeral, it's a homegoing. The concept traces back to West African spiritual beliefs that death is not an ending, it's a transition. Enslaved Africans who were stolen and shipped to America in the 1600s and 1700s saw death as freedom from bondage, a return to their homeland, a release from suffering. So they celebrated, singing, shouting, rejoicing. Their white enslavers found it confusing, even threatening, because in European Christian tradition, funerals were supposed to be somber events. That cultural divide between celebration and mourning is still alive today in churches from Atlanta to Chicago to Houston. Number 2, the open casket standard. Walk into almost any traditional black funeral and the casket is open. This is not accidental. During the Jim Crow era, white-owned funeral homes either refused to serve black families entirely, or they did such a poor job preparing the body that black families could not even recognize their loved one. White morticians did not know how to cosmetize darker skin tones or style black hair properly. So black funeral directors stepped in, became some of the first black-owned businesses in America, and made it their mission to make the deceased look alive. The term people still use today is casket sharp. And then there's Mamie Till Mobley, who insisted on an open casket for her 14-year-old son Emmett Till in 1955, so the entire world could see what hatred looked like. That single decision helped ignite the civil rights movement. Number 3, catching the Holy Ghost during the service. In many white funerals, especially Catholic and Episcopalian services, you sit quietly, follow the liturgy, and speak when prompted. But in black church funerals, emotion is expected, encouraged. People shout, they collapse, they run up and down the aisle. They catch the Holy Ghost. This traces directly back to the West African ring shout, a counterclockwise circle dance with clapping and call and response singing that enslaved Africans performed at burials, often in secret at night because they were forbidden from gathering. When Christianity was introduced to enslaved populations, the ring shout merged with worship, and that spiritual release at funerals became a way to process grief that European traditions never allowed. Number 4, passing the children over the casket. This next tradition from the Low Country churches of South Carolina catches a lot of people off guard. In certain black families, particularly those with roots in the Low Country and the Caribbean, small children are physically lifted and passed over the open casket of a deceased family member. It looks alarming if you have never seen a child held above an open casket in a packed church, but it is a protective ritual. The belief, rooted in West African and Gullah Geechee spiritual traditions, is that if a child does not see the dead properly, the spirit of the deceased might follow them or haunt them. Passing the child over the casket introduces them to the dead in a controlled way, releasing the spirit's attachment. You will not find this ritual in any white funeral tradition in America. But the traditions were not just about the spiritual side of death. What happened after the burial and who fed the family told an even bigger story. Number 5, the repast. After a white funeral, you might get a small reception, coffee, store-bought cookies, polite conversation in the church basement. After a black funeral, you're eating for hours. Fried chicken, macaroni and cheese, collard greens, pound cake, sweet potato pie. The repast is a full-blown community meal prepared by the church mothers, neighbors, and family friends. It dates back to a time when funerals were one of the only occasions enslaved people were allowed to gather socially. The food was not just about comfort, it was about restoring the body after grief, bringing nourishment back into a family that had lost everything, and the kitchen politics around who cooked what dish for the family. That's a whole separate conversation nobody outside the family is supposed to hear. Number 6. The New Orleans Second Line. This is arguably the most famous black funeral tradition in America, and it is unlike anything you will find in white funeral culture. In New Orleans, a brass band meets the family at the church or funeral home. They march through the neighborhood streets playing slow dirges and hymns on the walk to the cemetery. The family, the funeral directors, and close friends make up the first line. Behind them, the community follows, dancing, waving handkerchiefs, twirling decorated parasols through the streets. That is the second line. After the body is buried and the family says their final goodbye, the band shifts gears. The dirges stop. The tempo picks up. They launch into songs that shake the sidewalk. This tradition fuses West African circle dances with European military brass band marches, and it has been alive in New Orleans since the late 1800s. Number 7. Sitting up with the dead. Before embalming became common, black families in the rural South would bring the body home and keep it there until the funeral, sometimes for days. Family members took turns sitting with the deceased all through the night in the front room, making sure the body was never left alone. This practice, called sitting up with the dead, had spiritual roots. The belief was that the spirit might become restless or confused if left alone in darkness, but it was also practical. There were no funeral homes accessible to black families in many rural areas of Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. White funeral homes would not serve them, so the home became the funeral home. White families in Appalachia and the rural Midwest had a similar tradition called the wake, but it faded out much faster once funeral homes became widespread in the early 1900s. And while some traditions were about practicality and survival, others were about what you wore, what you carried, and what those choices meant. Number 8. Wearing white instead of black. In European funeral tradition, mourners wear black. Period. It represents grief, loss, mourning. But in many black funeral traditions, especially in Southern Baptist and Caribbean-rooted churches, the family wears white. White symbolizes glory, spiritual victory, and the belief that the deceased has crossed over into heaven's light. Some families coordinate entire color themes for their homegoing services, requesting guests wear lavender, gold, or red, depending on the personality of the person who passed. That level of intentional pageantry is something traditional white funerals rarely incorporate. Number 9. The funeral fan. If you have ever been to a black church in the summertime, you have seen the funeral fan. That stiff cardboard fan on a wooden stick with a picture of a white Jesus, or Martin Luther King Jr., or a landscape painting of a peaceful river on one side and a funeral home advertisement on the other. Those fans were provided free of charge by black funeral directors as both a marketing tool and a public service. Before air conditioning, they were the only thing keeping grandmothers upright during a 2-hour service in a packed church in July. You will find those fans stacked on pews in black churches from Mississippi to Maryland. White churches replaced them with air conditioning decades ago. But the funeral fan held on because it was never just about the heat. It was a cultural object, a keepsake, a piece of the community tucked into a Bible and passed down. And if the fans kept the congregation alive inside those churches, the people running the service floor kept the whole homegoing from falling apart. Number 10. The usher board and the funeral procession inside the church. White funerals typically rely on the funeral director to manage the room, but at a black homegoing, the church ushers run the service floor with military precision. They are dressed in matching white uniforms, directing mourners row by row to view the casket, guiding them past the front pew where the family sits so they can offer a hug or a nod. And standing nearby, almost invisible until needed, is the mortician's nurse, sometimes called the First Lady, Her job is to tend to the grieving, hand out tissues, and keep smelling salts close by for the family members who collapse in the church aisle. That role alone tells you something about how differently grief moves through these two traditions. Number 11. Photographing the deceased. In white funeral culture, taking a photograph of the body in the casket is often seen as morbid or disrespectful. In black funeral tradition, it is expected. Family members walk up to the casket with their phones and snap pictures, not out of curiosity, but out of love. It is documentation. It is proof that the funeral home did their job well. And for family members who could not travel to the service, those photographs sent through group chats and family text threads are the only goodbye they will ever get. Number 12. The soloist who stops the whole room. Every black funeral has that one singer. She is standing right there in the choir stand, microphone in hand. She adjusts the stand, closes her eyes, and does not just sing a hymn. She delivers it. She starts soft. Then the organ comes in, then the drums. Then her voice cracks on purpose, and the entire church falls apart. Songs like Going Up Yonder or Precious Lord, Take My Hand, or His Eye is on the Sparrow have been known to shut entire services down for 10 minutes while people weep and catch their breath. In white funerals, a soloist performs a prepared song from a fixed program. In black funerals, the soloist is part preacher, part therapist. But the differences did not end inside the church walls. What happened after the service, out in the streets, and on the drive to the cemetery, told its own story. Number 13. The funeral program as a keepsake. In white funerals, the program is a folded piece of cardstock with the order of service printed on it. You read it, set it on the pew, and leave it behind. In black funerals, the program is a full booklet. It has the obituary, the order of service, photographs from every decade of the person's life, poems, Bible verses, acknowledgments, and sometimes a family tree. People keep these booklets for years. They tuck them in Bibles, pin them to refrigerators, file them in family records, because during slavery, black Americans were not allowed to place obituaries in local newspapers. So they created their own printed record of a life. That tradition never stopped. Number 14. Driving the hearse through the old neighborhood. In most white funerals, the hearse goes directly from the church to the cemetery. Shortest route, no detours. In black funerals, the hearse takes the scenic route, through the neighborhood where the person grew up, past the house where they raised their kids, down the street where they used to sit on the front porch. It is a final tour, a last goodbye to the places that shaped them. And the neighbors know. They come outside and stand on their porches in the afternoon sun, watching the hearse pass, waving, bowing their heads. Number 15. Pinning money or ribbons on the family. At many black funerals, particularly in the South and in Caribbean American communities, mourners pin cash directly onto the clothing of the bereaved family members. Dollar bills, fives, tens, 20s, fastened with safety pins to the lapels and dresses of the widow, the children, the mother. It is not about showing off. It is about immediate financial relief. Funerals are expensive, and in communities where burial insurance was historically unavailable because white insurance companies refused to write policies for black families, this was how the community stepped in. You handed your neighbor what you could, right there in the church pews. That tradition still lives in some families today, even though a lot of young people do not understand where it came from. You just heard how black families have been building financial safety nets for each other since slavery, pinning cash on a widow's dress because insurance companies would not cover them. That kind of community economics is still relevant today. If you want to make sure the wealth you have built actually reaches the next generation, check out the Black Dollar Playbook. It is a free guide on protecting what you have earned, building something your grandchildren can inherit, and making your money work the way your family always intended. The link is in the description. Number 16. The pallbearers in matching suits and white gloves. In white funerals, pallbearers are often family members or close friends dressed in whatever dark suit they own. In black funerals, the pallbearers are coordinated, matching dark suits, crisp white gloves, sometimes matching ties. They move in unison, carrying the casket with rehearsed precision down the church steps and into the waiting hearse. The white gloves symbolize purity and respect for the dead, a tradition that carries over from fraternal organizations and black Masonic lodges that have been managing burials in the community for over 100 years. Number 17, the wake versus the visitation. White families typically hold a visitation or viewing at the funeral home the evening before the service. It is structured, usually an hour or two, with a receiving line. In black tradition, the wake is an event unto itself. People come through the family home for hours. Food is served in the kitchen and the dining room. Stories are told around the table. Laughter and tears mix together. In the old days, before reliable embalming, the wake was also practical, a way to make sure the person was actually dead before you buried them. That is where the word comes from. You sat and watched, waiting for them to wake up. Number 18, the church nurse. At a traditional black homegoing, there is almost always a woman in a white uniform standing near the front pews of the church with a small kit. That is the church nurse. She is not a medical professional in the clinical sense, but she is the person who catches Auntie when she faints at the casket. She has got smelling salts, tissues, a handheld fan, and sometimes a cup of water ready on the front pew. In white funeral settings, that role simply does not exist, but in black churches, where grief pours out physically and loudly, the church nurse has been essential for generations. And after the service ended, after the last song was sung and the casket was lowered into the ground, the traditions continued at the grave itself. Number 19, grave decorations rooted in African spirituality. After a black burial, particularly in the South Carolina Lowcountry and along the Gulf Coast, families place objects on the grave, not just flowers, bottles, seashells, mirrors, cups, broken plates, clocks stopped at the time of death. In European tradition, grave decorations are limited to headstones and flowers, but the black tradition of placing personal objects on graves traces directly to Central and West African beliefs. Broken vessels were meant to release the spirits trapped inside the objects, allowing those spirits to travel with the deceased to the afterlife. Shiny objects and items associated with water symbolized the passage between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Number 20. The 3-hour service. A white funeral rarely exceeds 45 minutes, an hour at most. But a black homegoing inside a Baptist church on a Saturday afternoon? You are in that pew for 2, 3, sometimes 4 hours, and nobody complains. Because in black funeral tradition, time is suspended. Songs run long. Speakers who were not on the program walk up and share memories. The pastor preaches a full sermon, not a 5-minute reflection. This goes back to the reality that funerals were among the very few occasions enslaved people were allowed to gather. Those gatherings became more than services. They became reunions, community check-ins, and spiritual revival meetings all at once. Shortening them would have been an insult. Number 21. Releasing white doves or balloons. At the end of many black burial services at the cemetery, the family releases white doves into the sky. When live doves are not available, white balloons go up instead. The symbolism is direct. The soul leaving the body and ascending to heaven. Some families tie written messages to the balloon strings, final words to the deceased rising into the clouds. White funerals occasionally incorporate this tradition too, but it is far more common and deeply ritualized in black communities, especially among families with deep church roots. Number 22, the limousine procession. In a white funeral, the immediate family might ride in one black car behind the hearse. In a black homegoing, especially for a matriarch or patriarch, the funeral home rolls out a fleet. 2 limousines, 3, sometimes 5, stretching down the block. The limousines are about dignity, pure, unapologetic dignity. During Jim Crow, black families were denied dignity in every other aspect of public life. The funeral was the one event where the community controlled the narrative. The procession rolling down the main street was a declaration. This person mattered. This family matters. And everybody on the street is going to see it. But these traditions were never just about individual families. They were held together by institutions and rhythms that shaped entire communities. Number 23. The funeral home as a community institution. White funeral homes are businesses. They advertise, compete on pricing, and serve whoever walks through the door. Black funeral homes are something different entirely. They are family institutions, passed down through generations, built on trust and word of mouth. The funeral director is not just a business person. He is a counselor, a community leader, sometimes a civil rights organizer. During the movement, black funeral directors provided financial backing and gathering spaces when no one else would. Their hearses transported civil rights workers across state lines. Their parlors hosted strategy meetings late into the night. Losing a black-owned funeral home in a neighborhood means losing far more than a service provider. Number 24. The Saturday funeral. White funerals are held whenever the schedule allows, often midweek, but black homegoing services are almost always on Saturday. The reason is practical and cultural. Saturday lets family members travel from out of town without missing work. It allows the church to dedicate its full space and congregation to the service. And historically, Saturday was the only day many working-class black Americans had off from the factories and the fields. The weekend funeral became standard because it was the only option that guaranteed everyone could attend. Even distant family members or feuding relatives are expected to put differences aside and show up on that Saturday. Missing a funeral in the black community is a serious offense. Number 25. Burial over cremation. In white American culture, cremation has been rising for decades and now accounts for more than half of all dispositions. But in the black community, traditional burial remains the strong preference. The reason is deeply theological. The homegoing is built on the belief that the body will be resurrected. You cannot resurrect ashes. Burying the body in the earth mirrors the biblical concept of returning dust to dust, with the expectation that the body will rise again in glory. There are also cultural echoes of slavery at work. Enslaved Africans who died were often buried in unmarked graves along the edges of plantations without ceremony. Having a marked plot, a proper headstone, a casket with silk lining, that became an act of defiance, a way of declaring that this person lived, that they had a name, and that they deserved a resting place the world could find. These 25 traditions did not appear out of nowhere. They were built by communities who were denied basic human dignity in life and made sure they would not be denied it in death. Every custom, from the open casket to the matching white gloves to the 3-hour sermon, carries a story, a reason, a piece of history that connects generations across time. Whether you grew up with these traditions or you are learning about them for the first time, the real question is not why black funerals and white funerals look so different. It is, what does a community's relationship with death reveal about the way they lived? I break down culture, history, and the traditions that shaped who we are every single week. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one.